Okay, lesson number 11. We're going to be talking about integers and floats. These are just different data types that you can use as variables inside your program. So this is going to be lesson 11. And let's put those floats together. So I for integer equals 20. Let's use x for the float, 6.0. Now the only difference between an integer and a float is an integer doesn't have a decimal. A float does have a decimal. So in this situation, our integer value is 20 and our float value is 6.0. Now we'll print our integers. And you can see the display 20 and 6.0. Now because these variables hold a value, we can perform calculations with them. So if we go I plus x and print, you can see we get 26.0. Now Python is being nice to you here because you're adding two different data types, an integer and a float, and it's just displaying it as a float. Some languages don't do that, and to be honest, sometimes Python doesn't do that either. You would have to add something into your code in order to add those two together, but Python 3 is being nice to you, making it easy. So it's pretty simple to do that. Now, as I spoke in other lessons, if you put it inside quotation marks, it's not going to perform a calculation because we know that anything inside quotation marks get displayed as simply that. The literal characters that are inside the quotation marks get displayed. But something that I find very important is explaining what your code is saying. So when we output something, if you were creating something for an actual client and they wanted a calculation done and it just displayed the output was just the answer, I don't think you're doing a very good job for your client. So it's important to have something out there that shows exactly what the calculations are in the code and what is being output. What's 26? We need to know what that number is. So you could do something like this. The sum of I plus x, or the sum of I and x equals. And if you can remember from the previous lesson, that if we're going to add this string to our variable, I or x, or this, we're going to have to concatenate them. That means to combine them. Before we do that, let's print out all the other typical calculations that you could use. So I minus x. Print out I times x. And the times that we use is the asterisk, the number, the function 8, or the shift 8 key. Let's print out I divided by x. And the last one I'm going to print out here is called the modulus. And let's go 20% 6. And let's make it simpler so that I can explain what a modulus is. 5% 4. Now when we run this, we get all of these numbers. 14, 120, 3.33335, and 1. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1. Modulus means you want to know the remainder of what's of a calculation. Okay, so what would be the remainder if 5 was divided by 4? Well, the remainder would be 1, because 4 can fit into 5 one time with 1 left over. Now if we change this to 4%, 4, I hope you can guess what the output will be. Okay, we get a 0. That can be valuable to you when you're trying to use Booleans or want complex calculations to show you either 1 or 0. Okay, let's get back to concatenation. We want to combine a string and our calculation. So common sense would say that I would just write what I've written up at the top. The sum of I and x equals, now let's make it a little bit simpler. Let's say that is, we're just going to identify the float that we have in our program. So we're going to say x is space. This,
Mr. Dubourg, please come to the office. Mr. Dubourg.
This would be the simple one, and then say add x. Now you can see here we don't get an error on the code because it's saying, hey, this code is written correctly. But when we run it, we get an error on line 13. The error type is must be string, not float. But what that's saying is you're trying to add a float and a string together. You can't combine a string and a float because they're two different things. Well, that's not 100% accurate. If you remember back to the lesson on string variables, I gave you two other ways to concatenate things. So for this one, we say x is space percent string plus percent x. Now this will allow us to combine those two. The other option we talked about in the string variable lesson was x is open and close brace dot format x. And we need a plus here, not an equals. My mistake. We don't need anything there, the same as with this one at the bottom. So now when we run these, excuse me. Okay, so here's something that I talked about earlier in the lesson. And it was when we originally talked about comments, the value of comments and an effective way to use them. So typically we would be going through and commenting and leaving comments to explain what our code is. But if you also run into a situation like this where you have one line of code in line 13 for us that is causing you an error, if you comment it out, then you're going to be able to run your program. Now the reason you'd want to do that is, for this obviously we know it's not going to work, but maybe it's something that you just need to figure out later. So you want to comment it out so that the program skips over it, and then when you run it, your other lines of code will work. So this is a good habit to get into. If you delete your code, you could lose your idea or forget what you were trying to do. So just comment it out, and then when you run it, you get x is 6, x is 6. Both of those allow you to do the same thing. Okay, that's a short one. That's integers and floats. The assignment is right after this, and then you can go on to the quiz.